It's been kind of a quiet offseason so far for the Jets, but there's still a long way to go. And in the days and weeks ahead, I think there are players who fit a specific profile who could interest the Jets. Let's preview the rest of the Jets offseason today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, we're going to have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Let's jump right in. And our first question, John, what can we expect from the second and maybe third wave of free agency? Who are the names to look out for? Can we expect the Jets to make any moves of significance, whether it's through free agency or a trade? Well, I think that at this time of year, it's always best to set your expectations low when we're talking about the types of moves that are going to generate headlines, because most of the big names are already signed with new teams. It's entirely possible that this new Jets regime, finds a player who's available, who they like, who could really fill a need, a guy who's a household name. But it feels to me like this is the kind of offseason that's not going to excite a lot of people. It feels like the kind of offseason where the Jets are just kind of laying low. They're kind of using, and it feels like we're moving in the direction where they're going to use 2025 to kind of reset their salary cap. This is something we've talked a lot about on the show, really over the last couple of years, how the Jets went all in behind Rodgers in 2023 and 2024. And in doing that, I'm not going to say they were sacrificing their 2025 season, but they were sacrificing a lot of resources in 2025 because for all intents and purposes, Jets borrowed a lot of resources from this season to try and load up the last 2 years around Rodgers. So the Jets are kind of like in a situation where they're short on resources, and rather than borrow resources from 2026, this new regime, I think, is just using 2025 to kind of reset their salary cap. Now, that's not to mean that this team is going to be tanking. Not by any stretch of the imagination. This team's going to be playing hard, and this coaching staff is going to be trying to win games. And there is, I'll argue this all day long, there is a decent base of talent on this team. I will say thank you, Joe Douglas, for that. I was critic of a lot of what Joe Douglas did, but Joe Douglas did improve this team during his tenure here. There's no question about that. But this is not an all-in offseason. And it's different from the last 2 years, because last 2 years have kind of been like the sports talk radio host's dream, the ESPN dream offseason, the NFL Network dream offseason, where the Jets were making all kinds of flashy moves. At this point of the year, I don't think we're going to see a lot of flash. There's one other aspect of this. Again, this is kind of like an offseason where the Jets are resetting. I do think they have a bit of an eye towards the compensatory draft pick formula. And if you're not familiar with the way compensatory picks go, the NFL sets aside 32 draft picks every year, and they go to teams that lost more than they gained in the previous offseason. So this year's compensatory picks for the 2025 NFL draft are based on the 2024 offseason. Jets did not receive any because the Jets were pretty aggressive in free agency. The compensatory picks for 2026 will be based on this offseason. And there's a great website, overthecap.com, that projects all the data on this. And overthecap.com projects that the Jets are in line right now to receive a fourth round pick if they don't do anything else in free agency, because essentially the Jets signed 3 free agents who hit the salary threshold, but they lost 4. So they gained 3, lost 4. But that means they get 1. That means 4 minus 3 is 1. That means they're in line for 1 extra draft pick. It would be a fourth round pick for Hassan Reddick. So the Jets lost Reddick, DJ Reed, Javon Kinlaw, and Morgan Moses. Those are the 4 that they lost. The 3 that they've gained are Justin Fields, Brandon Stevens, and Andre Sisco. So Hassan Reddick, who signed an annual deal worth about $14 million with Tampa Bay, would get net the Jets a fourth round pick. And one thing I'd say is that I think that's significant from the standpoint that, first of all, a fourth round pick, don't undersell the value of a fourth round pick. A fourth round pick in the right hands can turn into a good player for your team. But also, because this is, I don't want to use the word rebuild. It's a bit of a reset year. And again, that doesn't mean the Jets are expecting to be at the bottom of the league. That doesn't mean the Jets will accept being at the bottom of the league. But it's not a year where the Jets are going to compete for a Super Bowl. So who would you add that's really going to add to your win total at this point? because if there's nobody who's really going to make a big difference, is it worth losing a 4th round pick? A year ago, and this will drive me crazy until this podcast ends. A year ago, the Jets would have had a 4th round pick for Bryce Huff had they not signed Javon Kinlaw. Yeah, so I'm a little annoyed about that still, the fact that Javon Kinlaw cost the Jets a 4th round pick. I don't think you want to repeat that mistake. I know it wasn't Darren, Mougey, and Aaron Glenn who made that mistake. I don't think you want to make that same mistake, though. So I think there will be kind of low cost signings, because guys who don't make much money, they don't count towards the compensatory pick formula. The same goes, players who were cut do not count towards the compensatory pick formula. So Jets may have their eyes out on guys who were cut, because if the Jets sign somebody who was cut by his team, they don't lose that 4th round pick that they're going to get for Hassan Reddick. And when you think about the damage of the Hassan Reddick trade, it actually undoes some of it if the Jets can get that pick back. I mean, it's still bad because they gave up a 3rd round pick and they're only getting a 4th round pick, but you actually can undo some of the damage of that trade by doing that. You drop around, which hurts, but it's better than losing Reddick for nothing, because the Jets essentially lit a 3rd round pick on fire to get him. So I think you'll see lower cost moves. Now, I'm speculating right now. There are a couple of guys who I think could be, in play. I mean, one of whom is still looking for a new team, and that's John Kaminsky, who played with Aaron Glenn. He's an interior type defensive lineman, a decent run stopper, a guy who can play maybe little defensive end, a little defensive tackle. And I'm surprised the Jets haven't signed any of Glenn's Detroit guys, but Kaminsky's a guy who suffered it. He kind of started the got the ball rolling on the injuries the Detroit Lions had on the defensive side of the ball last year, because he got injured during the summer and missed the full season. But a guy who's been decent in the past, a guy who won't cost much money. And then there's maybe some upside plays out there. I mean, the Jets still need a tight end. Gerald Everett's still available. Now, Gerald Everett had kind of a disaster year for the Bears. Now he's 30. So I'm always a little skeptical of guys whose production completely falls apart after they turn 30. But he is a guy who, might be a decent bounce back candidate. I would think that there's at least a decent chance Gerald Everett could be better than Jeremy Ruckert. And he won't cost much because, again, he just had a disaster year in Chicago. Guy I've mentioned a couple other times on the show, Jedrick Wills, who a former 1st round pick of the Cleveland Browns. I mean, it depends on how much he costs, but if he only costs a couple $1 million and doesn't count against the compensatory pick formula, he might be worth a shot. I mean, he's a guy who's dealt with injuries the last couple of years. He's been inconsistent, but has that high draft pick pedigree, which is one thing, but more significantly, his play's been up and down, but he has shown flashes. And at the offensive line, sometimes it takes guys 4 or 5 years to develop. Sometimes they don't produce until they get on their second teams. But I think you're going to see more guys of that type, where the Jets are trying to find somebody who's a low cost guy who maybe outperforms his contract. I don't think you're going to see many big names. I think that you may see guys like an upside play, like a Wills, the same in the same breath as you think about the 3 big signings the Jets made. You have Justin Fields, you have Brandon Stevens, and you have Andre Cisco. In some ways, those were all upside plays. These are all guys with ability, but guys who are not guaranteed to be good. I think you'll see signings like that. And then maybe a bounce back guy, Gerald Everett would make sense. And then after that, maybe it'd be like a guy familiar with Aaron Glenn's system. And, the guy I just mentioned is John Kaminsky. But, there are other guys from Detroit that the team could potentially sign. So those are kind of the guys I have in mind for the Jets as they move forward this offseason. I had here on the Locked On Jets podcast. What can we say about Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey so far? It's still very early. They haven't, the record is 0-0. There have not been any games yet. They've only made a couple of signings. But there are some things to like about what they've done, and we'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets should not be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute tickets at unbeatable prices. Curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, and theater using Game Time picks. You can check the Game Time app. There are amazing deals on huge matchups coming up, and there are super deals, the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. I don't just tell you about Game Time. I've used it myself on many occasions. amazing deals, last minute tickets. Every single time I've used it, I've been satisfied. It's so easy to operate, and you get your tickets in plenty of time for your event. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL, Locked On NFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. John, I can't say I've been following the Jets with a passion since midway through last season. There were reports that billionaire teenagers were making trades off Madden ratings and handing out game balls. Woody going back overseas was our only hope, and that hope is now gone. So since Woody's not selling the team yet, if ever, what hope of functionality do we have right now? And on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, where do you put how our new GM and head coach have fared so well? And what will boost that number going into the draft? And what would lower it further? So lots of questions there. A fan clearly expressing frustration over what's happened with the Jets the last year. And look, this has not been the franchise's finest hour this last year. And, like there was all these stories come out of this crazy stuff happening behind the scenes. And one of them was that apparently Woody Johnson's college age son was involved in decision-making where he's giving his father advice based on Madden ratings. I mean, it's crazy, this multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And Woody Johnson's sons, who are, I think there's, both teenagers, are like giving advice, and the Jets did not deny this. The crazy thing is the Jets did not deny this. The Jets downplayed it. They're just like, well, he's giving advice. They're giving advice, but Woody gets advice from a lot of different areas. Just craziness. So I can understand that. Obviously, I don't need to tell you, if you were a Jets fan, the 2024 was a very difficult season. So one thing I disagree with, you said Woody Johnson going back overseas was our only hope, and that hope is gone. Well, just don't forget, the Jets were run pretty poorly the last time Woody Johnson went overseas. He put his brother in charge, and his brother ended up being no better and arguably was worse than Woody. Now, I think like pre-2021 Woody was better than the version we've had the last couple of years. Now, the Woody Johnson we had last year is like the worst version of Woody Johnson, but Chris Johnson was better than a lot of versions of Woody Johnson that came before. So I don't know that Woody going overseas was necessarily the best thing for the Jets franchise. I think they're just like different versions of bad. So how do we have hope right now? It's very difficult to like look at this franchise and have a lot of confidence going forward. I think the best reason for hope, or maybe the best rationale for hope, is maybe at some point Woody Johnson just gets embarrassed for after all the losing, and maybe something finally clicks. But the other aspect of this that maybe gives you a little bit of hope, and I'm kind of just throwing it out there, is maybe these are guys who will push back on him, because I just got the sense there was very little pushback from Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. It felt like when Woody Johnson took control, Joe Douglas just kind of quit. It just seemed like he didn't really want to be here anymore, and he really wasn't like doing basic things. After Woody Johnson fired one of his top lieutenants, Rex Hogan, a year ago, I mean, you read what was happening behind the scenes, you just get the feeling Joe Douglas was completely checked out and didn't really push back. And Robert Saleh, I think, was just more worried about like keeping his job. So I think the hope is that with a new regime, guys who were just hired here and guys who have the most political capital that they're ever going to have in Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey, maybe they'll push back, and maybe the hope is that Woody Johnson will defer a little bit more. And if we start going down that road again, hopefully they'll stop it. Hopefully they'll fight back. Hopefully they'll push back and say, Woody, we can't be doing this if we want to win. That's my hope. Now, will it happen? I mean, we'll see we'll see how things turn out. I will say this though, I do think that there's been a professionalism within this organization that's been lacking. Now, we'll see how good these signings turn out. I mean, I don't know how Justin Fields is going to turn out. I don't know how Brandon Stevens is going to turn out. I don't know how Andre Cisco is going to turn out. I don't know how some of these other more minor moves are going to turn out. But the Jets are not trying to win Twitter anymore. And that's a positive. And like whether or not Woody Johnson's sons were directing moves based on Madden ratings and Twitter, one thing was clear is that the Jets were playing to the audience the last couple of years. The Jets were trying to like make the moves that would like get them the most media praise and get them the most buzz on social media. And it didn't matter whether or not these were actually good football moves. They were just moves that were moves that would generate a lot of hype. I mean, one thing that was clear to me the last couple of years is that the Jets were really, really focused on outside perceptions. And the Jets were trying to get the Jets were it was really important for this team to get praise from like the national influencers. I don't get that sense anymore, because the move that would get you a lot of buzz is, bringing back Aaron Rodgers and bringing back Davante Adams and selling the idea, well, Rodgers is now a year removed from his injury, and now we have better coaching in here. I mean, it would have been very easy to bring Rodgers back and be once again, year 3, have a lot of buzz. You now have people in place who have said, you know what, that's not a great idea. We need to move forward. We need to move in a different direction. And, to me, that's a positive. I like the way they handled it. I think, they did not drag things out with Rodgers. They made it. I mean, look at what's happening with Rodgers right now. I mean, he's pretty much holding everybody hostage again. And this is the way things would have played out if he was still here. There's more professionalism in the organization now. That's the way I would put it. And for a team that's probably not going to compete for a championship in the next year or so, it's just like it was time to move. It was time to move on. I think it was time to turn the page. Next question. Hi, John. I know Garrett Wilson is the best wide receiver we've had since 2015 at least, but the group behind him are worse than the infamous year when Jeremy Curley was the number 1 receiver. This feels like classic Jets talk ourselves into the group we have and hope a draft pick saves our bacon. Do you think they should have more priority on getting another veteran receiver who can be a competent low-end number 2 receiver so defenses can't just triple team Garrett? Are they actually thinking that Wilson, Lazard, Corley, and Gibson plus maybe a draft pick are enough? Or do you think they're waiting to pick someone up on the second or third wave of free agency on a cheap deal? Who do you like the most of the still available wide receivers? I mean, look, it's not great behind Garrett Wilson. I mean, the problem with Davante Adams was just like his contract was too much, and he wasn't going to want to take a discount unless Rodgers was back, and that was just kind of a non-starter. In an ideal world, you would have been able to figure out a way to keep Adams, and he would have been invested in wanting to play, but that's just not the world that we live in. It is not a great receiver group. It's something that needs to be addressed. At the time we're recording this, there are some big names on the back end of their career. I don't know whether guys like Amari Cooper or maybe even like Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen was really old, but maybe you can squeeze another year out of him. There are veteran guys out there who, might be able to help. But again, I think the compensatory pick formula comes into play. And I think that, having Garrett Wilson is a big deal. If you have one receiver who can get open, that helps your offense in a very profound way. So I don't think all is lost at the receiver position, but I do agree that after Garrett, it gets dicey because, you have, I mean, are they really, I don't think that I have a tough time believing they're going to bring Lazard back at his current salary. I mean, I don't think that would be a very good move. Xavier Gibson's shown he's Xavier Gibson. I don't have a lot of hope for Gibson. Corley is essentially a project. I mean, Corley is a guy they drafted who I thought was a major project when they picked him and really did not show a whole lot in year 1. He's a guy who, you hope pans out, but you can't really plan on him being part of your future. It's more of if he pans out, then, hey, it's a nice bonus. It's tough. There are not a lot of great options. I think the Jets are kind of in this situation though, where, they may have to like hope they get lucky in the draft at the wide receiver position. Because there really aren't a lot of great options out there. And, like guys in the second and third wave of free agency, like there are positions where you can find somebody in the second, third wave of free agency. We talked a bit about this yesterday. Like you can find a run stopping defensive tackle. You can find a safety. It's much tougher to find like a quality wide receiver. I don't know that there are a lot of great upside plays there. I mean, again, maybe you bring in a veteran who's kind of on the downside of his career and hope maybe he can slide into being the number 2 behind Garrett, but it's tough. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the quarterback position. Jets drafting at 7, they have Justin Fields. Is there a prospect available who could rise up draft boards, who could interest the team? I'm not sure the answer is yes, but let's talk about one big name prospect as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag. Our next question is about the quarterback position from Chris. John, in a month from now, if the Jets take Jaxon Dart at 7th overall, how are you feeling about that? So Jaxon Dart is the quarterback from Ole Miss. And at this point, it seems like he's rated lower than 7, but as we know, quarterbacks can rise late in the process. Quarterback's the most important position on the field, and teams sometimes are not shy about being aggressive in drafting a quarterback. Jaxon Dart's an interesting prospect. I've watched a bit of him. I'll continue to watch him. And like when we talk about quarterback prospects, part of it's like, how much do I want to bet on him? I think Jaxon Dart's a viable prospect. I see NFL tools. I think he's got NFL the physical attributes you need to succeed in the NFL. And there are moments where, he does impressive stuff on the field. But I don't know I'd be that happy if the Jets drafted him 7th overall, because I feel like if you draft a quarterback 7th overall, then you are committing to him as your guy for the next 3 years or so. The next 2 to 3 years at least. I don't know that I feel that much conviction in him. I think like if the Jets were on the clock in day 2 and Jaxon Dart was there, that's a guy who would interest me, because again, he got the physical ability. There are moments where you see him like throw with anticipation. There are moments where you see him make impressive throws, but it's a challenge. I think the NFL is going to be a little tricky for him. Lane Kiffin, his college coach, is an excellent offensive coach. So on the one hand, it's good because he's gotten good offensive coaching, but on the other hand, Lane Kiffin's schemes are really, really well designed, and they're so well designed that you watch Dart, and a lot of times he's got guys running wide open where he doesn't really have to throw the tight windows because the play design pretty much makes it easy for him. And, I mentioned that I see moments where he throws with anticipation, but then I see moments where he doesn't throw with anticipation. I think his pocket presence needs some work. I think he's a bit of a work in progress. I could see a scenario where he turns out to be a good NFL quarterback. I don't have so much confidence in him, though, that I feel comfortable drafting him 7th overall. If Jets draft him 7th overall, I'll support him. I'll root for him. Again, I don't think it would be a hopeless case, but that's a little bit more aggressive than I'd like to be for him. I think like he falls to day 2, I'm interested. I think because I think you draft a guy day 2, that doesn't necessarily mean you're committing to him for the long run. It's just more we like his tools. We think there's a shot he can pan out. So that's kind of where I'm at. Where I would not feel comfortable wagering a high pick. I'd be more comfortable wagering though, a pick a little bit later on. Next question from Michael. John, thanks again for all your insightful commentary. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little too much, but there's an argument right now that there was no better option for the Jets in 2025 than Justin Fields. It's amazing he's only 6 months older than Louisville College quarterback Tyler Show, who may have touted highly as an early round pick. Fields already has 4 years of NFL experience, 45 touchdown passes, and over 2,500 rushing yards. He's far from a complete quarterback, but he may be able to develop with the right coaching and environment. Don't you think he was a much better option than free agents like Darnold? We've already been there. Daniel Jones, Jacoby Brissett, Cooper Rush, Gardner Minshew, Zappi, Garoppolo, Rudolph, and Mac Jones. Certainly the new regime wanted a fresh start rather than bringing back Rodgers. At 36 years of age when the season begins, and without much play in recent years, Tyrod Taylor seems to be a backup at this stage. Also, if Fields were in this year's draft, wouldn't he have been rated higher than Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? And some still feel that the Fields signing was not great. Is it just the proposed salary that was concerning? That still seems reasonable to me. Am I missing anything obvious? Michael, I agree with you. I think you actually summed up my position pretty well. I'm not the biggest Fields fan in the world, but you have to look at what the options were. I think you actually laid out. I think you actually succinctly. I shouldn't let anybody hear this because they're going to give you my job, because you succinctly laid out what I think is. I don't think he's a great option, but I think if you look at compare him with the other options, I'd rather have him than Darnold. I'd rather have him than Daniel Jones. I'd certainly rather have him than Jacoby Brissett or Jimmy Garoppolo or Mason Rudolph. And while Fields has been inconsistent, there have been some quality moments, and he's still young enough. I mean, look, he's going to be entering year 5. Based on what he's put on the film so far in his career, I think he's still young enough where things could pan out for him, where he could, put it together. I mean, one thing we've seen in the NFL in recent years is that teams sometimes expect too much out of young quarterbacks. They're expecting every young quarterback to step in and be great on day 1. And I think like the NFL has gotten carried away with this thing where the quarterback rookie contract, because to get a quality quarterback on the open market now costs like $50 million. So if you draft a quarterback, his salary is low the first 4 years. So it's like you end up with $40 million. If you say you draft a quarterback and he has a $10 million salary, that's an extra $40 million you can use to build up the rest of your team. And it's great if you actually have a guy who pans out, but not everybody's ready on day 1. I think teams have kind of like forgotten their role, their responsibility to develop young quarterbacks. I think they've also forgotten that, sometimes it takes time. Sometimes somebody's not ready to play year one and they need to sit a little bit. And it's tough because coaches' jobs are always on the line. So they don't have the luxury of letting guys sit. I mean, look at the team that's twice in the last 20 years sat a quarterback for 3 years. It's Green Bay, a team without an owner in the smallest market without much pressure. I don't think that that's an accident. But I really think if you look across the league, there are guys who are viewed as failures as first round picks who are developing once they get to year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7. It's happening with more and more frequency. Will it happen with Fields? I mean, I don't know, but could it happen with Fields? I think there's a shot. I think he's got some ability here. So yeah, that's kind of how I view it. Like, I would love for there to be a better option than Justin Fields. It's just nobody ever really laid out what that option is, and I don't think Rodgers was. So let's take Rodgers out of the discussion though, because they weren't bringing him back anyway. Who was the better option than Fields? I mean, I don't think there was. I think there are guys you could make an argument. Maybe you could argue Daniel Jones was like an equal option, but I don't think there's anybody you could say was like clearly a superior option to Fields who the Jets conceivably could have gotten. So I'm with you on that one, Michael. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.